I am a cosmic being.com. An evolution environmental option. December 1st, 2012. Reference Synergetic's 620 tetrahedron, Synergetic's 960.05. With this universal communication and equanimity process of consideration ushering in the QR era, obsoleting the AD era, and experimentally gathering the rudiments of quantum democracy's constitution of the omnicomprehensive anticipatory conscience domain may seem outright audacious. It nevertheless is exercising an evolution environmental alternative option. The environmental conditions and environmental assemblies of the AD era's referential fields, while enormously successful to the degree of every possible accomplishment during that evolutionary period, also regenerated the least desirable culminations in a mindlessness about what intellect now recognizes emerging from our cosmic awareness of the law of truth's tetrahedron as the minimum structural integrity of universe. It is a geometry configuration that appears out of a pure conceptuality. It does not appear to have been a cogent conceptuality of the AD era's BS complexes, PRJ, and belief systems, thought, language, constructions in any omnirational, omnicomprehensive inception conception with a consciousness of freedom, liberty, and equanimity for all. Instead, and apparently, because of the absence of forethought of the minimum thinkable set for subdividing universe wherewith the conceptuality in the process allows intellect to consciously recognize what comes back upon itself without any punitive intention, laced with the handiwork of blame, shame, condemnation, annihilation, alienation, imprisonment, and virtually every version of the outcast stigmatization which in every culture shows us desperate people living accordingly and in relative confusion about what is the most essential adaptation for their survival. The AD era mindsets have stigmatized our humanity by ignoring what we now learn is nature's coordinate system and universe's minimum structural system. The AD era propagates the educated ignorance of every self-destructive indifference to the very environmental conditions of our Earth as an essential resource for all species survival. By not recognizing what comes back upon itself, which is the tetrahedron as the first subdivision of universe shows, so too, with the human being's concerns referential to whatever else seems more important, for carrying on to the nth degrees of their indifference about what turns out to be in an omnidiametric counter-coordination of the anticipatory conscience domain's integrally economic thought, language, coordination, of a tetrahedron's topological and quantum identity in whole units throughout the co-occurring evolution scenario. You could insist that obsoleting the AD era is not essential, and instead we must integrate tetrahedron's topological and quantum identity henceforth in all experiments with physical universe. But what about the intractable belief systems for more than 2,000 years have caused such upheaval and every variation on slavery to its unyielding tyrannical will? Instead of decreasing in power, it has increased by the volume of indoctrination with no end in sight. And that is just the R factor of the PRJM belief system. There is also the BS complex itself, which is an inherited central bank system for empowering the PRJM belief system operations. There is the justice of the PRJM belief system, whose lineage dates back to the mindsets whose subconsciousness thrived and still does by compressive dominance, regardless that in areas on Earth some courts are less barbaric and more humane. They nevertheless are not omnicomprehensive conversant, nor evolved to the omnirational potential, where the whole humanity in the domain is educated and consequently informed about universe's integrity patterns, the geometry of thinking, and a conceptuality that is independent of size, time-space sizing. Consequently, the essential conceptuality environment of thought language is primarily subconsciously misinformed as to all evolutionary alternative options in the environmental condition. It is quite a complicated ordeal, even metaphorically imagining what could possibly turn a sow's ear into a silk purse, or in a conceptuality of overlong distorted reality with so much power in the realm that does affect intellect's anticipatory conscience domains and no willingness to relinquish it. So steeped in its self-accreditation as it is, it maintains the power to overwhelm and continue doing so despite the highest hopes of more logical, considerate local problem solving. If the tetrahedron is conceptually independent of relative size of the multidimensional events, and it is also one quantum of energy, this ought to be elementary in centuries of precedents that occurred before intellect's awareness evolution's anticipatory conscience domain conceptioning. The awareness signifies differently directed conceptioning, a differently coordinated sense of reality, a different reality basis from the AD era mindsets. Those mindsets are adamantly opposed to starting with universe, and otherwise insist that the conditioning inclination of pre-programmable people for indoctrination purposes must start with any or all of the BS complex's PRJM belief systems as the paramount and primary context within which all else is supposed to turn out better. Yet it never actually does, for any length of predictable time, in respect to our whole humanity, or in a self-sustaining clarity regarding equanimity for all. Equanimity for all requires a conceptual model of equanimity, which the tetrahedron's vector equilibrium is. It requires the nuclear observer's cognizance of its isotropic vector matrix, wherein the metaphysical and the physical universe are not relegated outside the anticipatory conscience domains of the thought process, none of which is inherent in the AD era's conflicting indebtedness to its universe-less, matrix-less reality basis. Mass to the AD era's earlier people, for instance, typically is alienated from consciousness of the amount of energy involved as a local event complex. Such thinking, under the domination of the R factor, associates mass as an exponential growth in membership numbers, thereby attributing more power, increasing powers, to the humanly contrived belief system, so ingrained into their psyche's mindsets over centuries of overlapping generations. The idea of changing their mind is misunderstood and mostly misinterpreted as an intolerable objective to be shunned, and in regions of the world it is punishable by death. That's how seriously demented the AD era can be, with no real hope of improving the situation in our lifetime or for our posterity. The QR era, like the tetrahedron to which quantum realities, quantum module, and quantum energy refer, occurs conceptually independent of events. This seems to have been as the conception of its possibility occurred to me. My awareness evolution, and independent of relative size, once in the conceptuality field of recognition, and with democracy also an evolving integrity of as yet fully a realized potentiality, the QR era must coincide with the continuity of conscious life that is liberated from what otherwise constrains and virtually denies the personality of it, which naturally is a product of a complex of periodic interactions or periodic recurrences of a higher frequency order. Thank you.